Africa flattening the curve, the coronavirus curve that is, or are we losing that battle? To give us insight into that question, I'm joined now by Wits School of Governance, Professor Alex van der Heever. Let's try and see if we can get him on the line. Prof, good evening and thank you for your time tonight. Drastically reduce the number of new cases is what we have been trying to achieve, but looking at the daily infection rate increasing, are we flattening the curve?
Well, it's a concern that we may not be flattening the curve, so to speak, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what our prevention methods are achieving at this point. What was hoped was that the lockdown, the original part of the lockdown, would buy some time for us to get testing and tracing in place at scale. And that is really the strategy, the cornerstone of all successful strategies internationally. And testing has to be at massive scale. And it doesn't matter whether you pick up very few positives. The whole idea is that you're very rapidly separating the infected from the uninfected. And in our densely populated communities, that is the only successful strategy. Our lockdown will not work very easily. So our testing strategy has now failed effectively, although we are doing some contact tracing and there is some targeting of hotspots. Yeah. But we are falling behind in managing the epidemic.
So are you saying that it's not ideal or an ideal picture to have high testing and low positives?
No, it's not at all. I mean, if you look now what China has just done in Wuhan, they had a few cases that arose and they targeted testing virtually the entire population. They went on a massive testing drive. And that's because they have built up the capacity to do rapid tests and to expand that extensively. If you look at countries like South Korea, in February they were already set up. They had the domestic companies producing the new tests based on the information they got from Wuhan. That's in February. They were producing domestically the reagents for those tests, and they were able to expand at scale. So the whole idea is testing and tracing at scale is what you need to manage the epidemic when it's at a low level. But if it gets to a high level, testing and tracing is not going to be sufficient.
Now, the fact that our lab testing is seeing some delays in terms of the release of the results, is that in any way impeding that work of tracing?
Yes, it's massively impeding it. And in fact, what's happening is that we are unable to use testing as a preventive method. So testing isn't just to find out that the person presenting before you has symptoms, has the virus. What you want to do is to find the asymptomatic people who are positive, and you want to trace everybody that they've been in contact with. So the rapid testing and tracing means that you find somebody who probably presented with symptoms. That might be the first person you test, but then you follow up their contacts. And probably around about 50 to 60% of the people that you find testing all of the contacts will be asymptomatic positives, which means they don't know they're infected. That they're infecting other people. So what you're there doing is stopping people who are unaware of their status from infecting others. And the faster you do that, the faster you prevent the epidemic from reproducing. That's what we're not able to do now with tests coming back over a week or up to 12 days later. You can throw them away.
Is the fact that the WHO says our doubling time has remained stable something that we should celebrate or take a note of?
No, we can't be sure of anything because once we fall behind in the testing, we're not even sure what we're seeing anymore. So once we moved nearly sort of 2 weeks behind with a 2-week backlog with over 100,000 test backlog, our positives that we're identifying are not a true reflection of the actual number of people who are infected. So we can't be totally certain where we are. It's possible that we will not have an extreme epidemic in the next month, but we will only find that out as things progress. It's not because we necessarily are in control of the situation, but it is not out of bounds of possibility that we will contain the higher end of this epidemic, but it's not really because we are totally in control.
So then what are the implications of this? What do we need to do to our testing regime? I mean, the Western Cape has been saying the number of those who are referred for testing from their screening is quite high, and that's how they have been leading, and also a significant lead in as far as tracing. But we do know now with the delays with the testing, they have also been complaining about lagging behind as far as the tracing is concerned. How do we improve the situation?
Well, you know, if I go back and I read the South Korean government report prepared in early April on their entire strategy, you will see within that everything technologically that they did from February to put in place rapid contact tracing techniques using all ICT arrangements that they could put in place. Their rapid testing framework, everything was based on rapid turnaround. And they did it, and they got it in scale. They prioritized it. So South Africa didn't prioritize those things. So right now we are relying on more ineffective methods, and I think that people are going to try and do the best they can with the current situation. It's not that it does nothing, but we could be way more effective than where we are now. This is the way to lose the game. And my concern, and I think the concern of a lot of people, is that once the new infections get beyond a particular threshold in terms of being, embedded in community-based infections within society in South Africa, it basically becomes impossible to stop with testing and tracing as a tool. You kind of have to retreat and just test the people at hospitals, test the people with symptoms. But for the rest of it, you're just relying on sort of generalized social distancing and whatever we can, universal wearing of masks and some protection on bulk transport and so on. But we should be more actively engaged, and we can't really get there. What we should have done was get all of the domestic industry together to create the testing regime fast, and we never did that. We should have got the domestic ICT industry together, and we should have created the whole contact tracing regime, which we never did. So even the things that I see in an April document telling us what Korea did in February, we haven't done to date.
Prof, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, Professor Alex van der Heever. When we continue,